After freedom from slavery, African Americans initially enjoyed some rights, but in 1877, federal troops who made sure African American rights were secured withdrew from the South. Gradually, after the troops left, rights were revoked. This sparked much civil protest that demanded that African American rights be returned.
But Booker T. Washington, an African American educator, leader, and orator, had a different approach to improving the condition and reputation of his people. He left a visible legacy in the creation of education for African Americans and led his people by trying to help them progress economically. This may have been a good approach in a time of violent oppression, but it created much criticism and made him a controversial leader because he did not argue for civil rights.
Booker T. Washington was born as a slave in April 5th, 1856. After being emancipated from slavery when he was 9, his family was still in poverty like many African Americans, and he was forced to work at salt and coal mines at a young age. But he always had possessed an intense desire for education. He managed to enroll and graduate from the Hampton Institute, leaving inspired by African American students who were devoted to learning, and the staff, who believed that the best way to improve the situation of any people was to instill knowledge in them and to teach them a practical trade. The philosophy that African Americans should learn a trade skill and not just pursue book learning also became ingrained in him. He became a teacher at different places, including Hampton and his hometown of Malden. Soon after, the state of Alabama decided to establish a school for training African American teachers in Tuskegee, Alabama. On the behalf of the school's trustees, a prominent citizen of Tuskegee, George Campbell, wrote to Hampton's principal, General Armstrong. He beseeched him to recommend a teacher to become a principal of the newly formed school. The trustees completely expected the principal to send a white teacher. General Armstrong, who knew Booker T. Washington very well, replied, "The only man I can suggest is none other than one Mr. Booker T. Washington, a graduate of this institution, a very competent, capable, mulatto or biracial person, clear-headed, modest, sensible, polite, and a thorough teacher and superior man."
When Booker T. Washington arrived in Alabama, there were no campus, buildings, books, supplies, or even funds to build a school. The state only allocated money to pay the instructors. He was impelled to teach at a rundown, leaky shack near the Butler Chapel AME Zion Church. But Booker T. Washington wanted to give those African Americans a proper education. Therefore, he decided to build a proper institute. Booker T. Washington chose an area of Tuskegee where there were many earnest African Americans who were attempting to make a living. He took a $200 loan from General J.F.P. Marshall, Hampton's treasurer, to buy land for the campus. Then he held fundraisers and worked with his students to build the school. He even made the kilns and bricks used to build the school. In his autobiography, Up from Slavery, he said, "After a good deal of effort, we molded about 25,000 bricks and put them into a kiln to be burned. This kiln turned out to be a failure. After much labor, the Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute was born. His hard work creating the school at Tuskegee led to African Americans there gaining education."
His widespread fame for the condition of African Americans spread, and he was invited to speak at the Atlanta Cotton Exposition, which was a convention to show how far the South had come since the Renaissance Civil War. His famous speech defined his philosophy. He said to cast down your bucket and called upon African Americans to better their own situation and for both races to work out to make the South progress. To those of my race who depend on bettering their condition in a foreign land or who underestimate the importance of cultivating friendly relations with the Southern white man, who is their next door neighbor, I would say, cast down your bucket where you are. African Americans and whites were separate fingers in society, he said, but could work together as the hand.
In light of the circumstances, he was being an adept leader by acting compromising. There was so much excessive violence, like lynching, against African Americans. Immediately demanding for civil rights would possibly create more conflict, and cause more people to be injured. He decided instead to solve this by trying to give African Americans a better place in society through education, which in turn, he noted, would make them ready to gain the same rights as whites as well. This is represented by a part of the Land to Cotton Exposition speech, where he orated that it is important and right that all the privileges of the law be ours, but it is vastly more important that we be prepared for the exercise of these privileges. The opportunity to earn $1 in a factory just now is worth infinitely more than the opportunity to spend $1 in an opera house. He subtly found a way to find the middle ground. He said that African Americans should focus on advancing themselves in the economy, but didn't directly say that civil rights should be given up.
Especially considering African Americans' primary spokesperson, Frederick Douglass, had died a few months before the speech, many African Americans began to consider Booker T. Washington their new savior. He eventually became more and more powerful, speaking with affluent businessmen like the founder of Kodak and Sears, and even advising President Theodore Roosevelt on race relations.
He also founded the Negro Business League, which tried to encourage more African Americans to start businesses and to promote the commercial and financial development of the Negro. Different local chapters held meetings where African American businessmen met and worked to improve their businesses. The League was connected with many other organizations and possessed many connections with powerful businessmen. There were also state meetings. One of the organization's leaders, Robert Moden, was invited to be in the board of directors of a bank. Through the organization, Booker T. Washington could help African American businessmen thrive and gain a better position in society. Even after his death, and to this day, the League continues to promote African American businesses.
In the outer society, Booker T. Washington acted extremely polite and generous to whites in order to gain funds to support Tuskegee and improve race relations. Therefore, many blacks, including those of the National Association of Advancement of Colored People, criticized him for being compromising. Ironically, he secretly used some of the money that he earned to support court cases against laws that limited African American rights. Two of these cases were Giles versus Harris and Giles versus Teasley, which attempted to abolish laws that prevented blacks from voting. In his later years, he grew to become more bold and published pamphlets that complained that African Americans were receiving an unequal chance in education.
Besides inspiring African Americans through his speeches, his most notable legacy was forming the first prominent institute for African Americans with a staff of mostly African Americans. The Tuskegee Institute, now called the Tuskegee University, is still around today. Another part of his legacy, the Negro Business League, was more temporary, but it still promoted African American businesses after his death. The Broad Axe, a newspaper published in Salt Lake, Utah, reported in 1915 that since the National Negro Business League's founding, the number of African American businesses had risen from about 25,000 to 45,000. Lastly, his speeches and letters convinced businessmen to aid African American education because Washington convinced them that African Americans would only pursue industrial education if they knew what was best for them.
The most outspoken and influential critic of his methods was W. E. B. Du Bois. He criticized him for not fighting for civil rights and instead encouraging African Americans to improve themselves instead. They became rivals, with W. E. B. Du Bois, a Northerner, founding the NAACP, which opposed Booker T. Washington, a Southerner, in ideals. Du Bois also criticized him of censoring newspapers in his favor and called the network of institutions that Booker T. Washington controlled the Tuskegee Machine. Today, many have forgotten about his contributions because his understated approach to improving the condition of African Americans seems meek compared to the audacity of leaders such as Martin Luther King Jr. However, his legacy of giving African Americans opportunities was equally important.
But ultimately, types of great African American leaders were necessary to earn racial equality.